Okay, Body Messiah. Um, this lesson right here is to have us regain our focus as we're looking throughout the history of the United States and how we're currently having struggles uh, battling and warring against these same principalities of Baal worship and idol worship. This lesson is titled Messiah's Body Warring Against Strongholds of Baal. And as you see here, I got like 4 points, just to highlight. So we can see exactly in this present day and time, those current principalities that we're warring against, okay? So here, for instance, this first thing is called the 1619 Project. And this is a project which just reveals the truth about American history. So many people are starting to lose their mind because this project is just to highlight the truth about the African slaves who helped to build this entire country off our backs. Our ancestors did free labor, and it's just revealing the truth of that. And you will see people, even in the body of Messiah, trying to war against this particular project. Okay, um, whenever we bring forth truth, no matter what arena we're in, it makes Satan angry. And it makes people who have been emboldening and glorifying these same principalities upset and irritated. It makes some of them run in fear and in shame. And rightly so. I get it. Because they've been glorifying things that have been warring against the children of the Most High God. So you'll see, for instance, like the monuments being torn down, that's still happening today. I'm going to attach once again, and I've attached maybe two times in prior lessons, a prophecy that was given about a people hidden in the Lord, right? So as we find out who the actual descendants of Israel are, these are the people who are hidden in the Lord. But when these men are prophesying about it, it's, a couple of them know the gravity of what they're prophesying about because one of them is kind of very hesitant to just blatantly say it, and they don't blatantly say who the people are. Okay, but you have all these various groups out there, like I mentioned before, like Israelites for Christ, groups of Hebrew Israelites who have been those men, brave brothers who are crying out, a voice in the wilderness, crying out about this, right? So now that all of these truths are being unfolded, there are people throughout society, throughout America and probably other parts of the world, who want to battle against these truths that are being revealed and brought to the forefront. It baffles me to see how people want to glorify one aspect of history and not bring forth the fact that the history is not that glorious. When you look at the atrocities that particular men and the monuments they're raising and trying to glorify. I've seen people with shirts on with Confederate flags that will say, this is not hate, it's just pride in history. But your proud history meant you were fighting to own my people and to slaughter them and beat them and abuse them, to breed them like animals. So let's give this whole history out there. Those people who have pride in those things are having pride in oppression and trying to destroy a people. That's what that quote, proud history is about. And once these truths keep being revealed, the more and more we're going to be warring against these old principalities. We've shown you inside your Bible studies where Baal worship from Egyptian time forward, how it has been traced down throughout history, and how it's reflected in these roots of white supremacy throughout the world. So there's no mistaking of that. Even when you look at the atrocity of Mr. George Floyd being murdered, right? You'll see people holding on to these principles of Baal who are like, I don't think the jury decided right. This was a blatant murder. a man's life being taken. And if something in your spirit is warring against the fact that the jury judged rightly against this because this was a murder, and calling the officer to have to pay for it, there's something wrong with your spirit. If you have an issue with that, you have a stronghold of Baal worship in you that's attached to white supremacy. And I don't care what racial group you're in, if you didn't see that as being a blatant murder and a murderer having to go to prison for that murder, then there's something wrong in your spirit. Now, when I attach the prophecy, I just want you to think about it, right? All of these things that are coming to the forefront, they have something that people in the political realm are warring against called critical race theory. And I just put a statement here. I kind of chuckle at the principle, what they call it. They call it critical race theory. But when we look throughout the atrocities of history and the way in which not only everyday citizens, but the whole government has fought against uh, uplifting the descendants of Israel, they've always worked to oppress them and keep them downtrodden. Okay? There's, to me, just the name critical race theory is just a silly name. It's a racial fact. It's not a theory, it's a fact. Okay? Now, I can back this up, and Surgical Bible Studies does, and a lesson series that's not popular, but hey, God wanted it to be placed forth the whole truth of His Word and what has happened to His descendants. And so, in Surgical Bible Studies, there's a lesson series out there called TBON, Lesson 9, Take Back Our Narrative, Lesson 9. And that whole is about 4 parts. And it talks about acknowledging the atrocities of the Black Holocaust. Okay? It focuses on the Black Holocaust, specifically here in America. And these things are facts. Our whole government has engaged in behavior that has caused it to do its best to oppress our people. Okay? And that dynamic is changing. Now, people are going to continue to war against that. So, as you can see here, for example, you have the Tulsa massacre, right? That happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma 100 years ago. They're still warring against and will not and refuse to give any compensation to the descendants, right? And I just want to make another valid point here. I want you to go and look. This massacre is one of many, okay? There are over 90 that were documented here, and I want you to go to the site. This site is called www.blackpast.org. And the title you need to search for in that, because they have a lot of information in there on Black history, is Racial Violence in the United States since 1660. Okay? But they document over about 90 different racial riots throughout America where there were Black communities that literally were built up. They were successful and thriving, and then the enemy came in through a lie usually, and people came in and destroyed it. And many times, just like you see with Tulsa, Oklahoma, the government partook in it. These white citizens would call the police, the military in, and the police and the military would work with the white citizens to destroy the Black community. Okay? This happened, and God expects this country and many others throughout the world, the atrocities that have happened throughout Africa because of the greed that is kicked off because of the greed of many European nations. Those nations are going to have to make amends for that. You see all this destruction befalling all of these different areas. Let's take America, for example. You will see where there's a huge drought. The drought has gotten even worse over the past 5 years or more. They keep saying, oh, this is just global warming, da da da. No, it's much more than that. Okay? God expects amends to be made for the atrocities. You'll see that they're fighting in the political arena right now. some senator or something that's fighting against uh, or aid money being given to black farmers. And he's saying because it's discrimination against white farmers. But for hundreds of years, the white farmers have always gotten the upper hand with tax dollars in this country. And black farmers were blocked from it. A lot of black farmers in the past were murdered, ran off their land simply taken from them. I think it's like 2% of farmers are black now. But I think all the way up until like the early 1900, there was like 30% of the population, 36 of the farmers were black. 36% were black farmers. So what does that tell you about inside? So as you see these people holding on to these strongholds of Baal worship and white supremacy, who are trying to battle that in court, God is like, I'm going to plunder those who plunder you, Jacob. So those who continue to want to plunder the descendants of Israel, he's like, okay, since y'all don't want to do right by these descendants and give them compensation, I'm going to dry out the whole land. So the whole 98% also is going to suffer. Look, when we look at Tulsa, Oklahoma, I've mentioned before and said in previous lessons that when people harm God's children and they're crying out to him, not just descendants of Israel, but the poor, the needy, the fatherless, the orphans, the widows, God exact his judgment on that nation. Now, when we look at Tulsa, Oklahoma, you got all types of atrocity against black and brown Hebrews. You have the Trail of Tears, right, that happened. And so I'm going to hold up this article that I want you to look up because God's judgments are true. Now, it doesn't mean that descendants of Israel or Hebrew descendants of Patriarch Abraham won't escape some of this destruction. All we have to do is continue to focus on the Most High God, abide by his standards. And if we are to pass due to any of these tragedies, we will go to the bosom of Abraham. We will be safe in his care and his arms, okay? But there are actual judgments that are falling because of that. So let's take Oklahoma for instance. I'm going to hold up the article and then I'm going to read it, okay? Look at this article and you see the title of it, right? Now I'm going to read just excerpts that I took out from this article. So just make a note of it and you can look at the whole thing on your own. And it states, the bullseye for awful tornadoes. Oklahoma gets an outsized share of natural disasters. So this article mentions that the state is number 1 in tornado disaster, number 3 in flooding, based on this national database, okay? And when you look at the population of it, it says Oklahoma has been declared a disaster 35 times because of tornadoes, 44 times because of flooding. You got to think, they're saying that the damage that has happened throughout Oklahoma has calculated to over $2 billion worth of damage. And you don't have that much damage, about the same as the coastlines of Florida and the Americas, 2.8 billion, I think they say, in some of the hurricanes. But you got this from flooding and tornadoes, okay? This is a part of God's judgment. And as different nations and countries or people do not want to make amends to the descendants of Israel, God is going to allow the enemy to tap dance all over the areas, okay? Just like I said with the farmers, you don't want to give these actual descendants an opportunity to have level playing ground. You do not want them to be blessed, even though they've been carved out of the blessings of financial compensation like all the other white farmers have for centuries, for decades. So God said, okay, I'm going to plunder those who plunder you, Jacob. That's what he's going to do in this time that he's uplifting the descendants of Israel. So as we continue to war against all of these principles and strongholds of Baal, continue to focus on the Most High God and teach your current and next generation. There was a person who commented on one of the videos. I think it was the Gathering of Israel, and his name was Kenneth Yehuda. And Mr. Kenneth had mentioned a scripture, Isaiah chapter 60. Now, those black and brown descendants, read it because it is so beautiful. How God is expressing the return and the gathering of his people. Okay? Um, I went on and I read from Isaiah chapter 60 all the way to 62. But like I said, if the nations don't want to do it, judgment is going to continue to fall if they don't want to try to make amends. And it'll continue to happen until our Messiah returns. But listen, I'm going to share this brief one. Everybody is going to know who we are and what they have to do in order to attempt to make amends. And God is going to give an opportunity for that. And if they choose not to, oh well, that's between them and the Most High. But I want to share Isaiah chapter 61, verses 8 and 9 here. And the scripture reads, "For I, Adonai, love justice." He loves justice. "I hate robbery and the burnt offering. And faithfulness I will reward my people and cut an eternal covenant. Then their offspring will be known among the nations, their descendants among the people. All who see them will recognize them, for they are the seed that Adonai has blessed." The whole world is going to know and come to an understanding of who we are as actual descendants of Israel. So all you Hebrew descendants of Patriarch Abraham, all you grafted in Hebrews, just glorify the Most High God to be blessed to live during a time as this, as we can see all this stuff unfolding. But press forward and move forward in truth. The only way these monuments and strongholds of Baal and white supremacy are going to be torn down is just by abiding by the whole truth of Adonai's word, and also professing the truth about the past and the atrocities that occurred and happened against God's people. Well, Body Messiah, this is the end of this particular lesson. I hope that you gain more insight from it. And like I said, I'm going to attach that particular prophecy in this lesson. And I want you to look at that prophecy and absorb and understand the times we're living in and who the people who are hidden in the Most High God are. Like I always say to you, I hope and pray that you're able to join me for many more. But until next time, may Adonai Elohim cover and surround you and your family, shield and protect you, and envelop you all in his shalom peace. Goodbye.